Welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. This is a presentation brought to you by Ability 360 in the Move United lecture series. Today we're talking all about sleep and circadian rhythm science, especially when it comes to its application for fitness and athletics. My name is Christopher Perry. I am a strength and conditioning consultant working with wheelchair basketball with Ability 360 and providing my awesome teaching abilities to do all that I can to help educate you all while you guys are all at home. This is part of our hashtag Adapt to Home series and doing all that we can to educate you all into how to be healthy during these crazy times that we're currently in. So let's learn about sleep science, which is my bread and butter that I study at ASU. So just a little bit about me. My name is Christopher Perry. I am a EXS faculty member at Bryan University, where I spend my full-time job working with students, teaching all sorts of subjects from exercise physiology to strength and conditioning, as well as leading our mentorship program. I am also finishing my doctorate at Arizona State University, which is in exercise science and nutrition, with a focus on sleep science, which is all that we're talking about today. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for over 13 years, and I have my own podcast. Be sure to check us out on Spotify. Here we go. So, before I actually go into anything that has to do with sleep, first I want to talk about what it means for our society today. According to the CDC, current findings suggest that 1/3, and I mean 1/3 of all Americans in our country get less than 7 hours of sleep per night. The National Foundation of Sleep tells us that we need anywhere from 7 to 9 hours of sleep for optimal health and functioning for adults. And that's from an age group of 18 upwards of about 55. As we go through the lifespan, we'll see that we have higher requirements for certain certain amounts of sleep. And that's usually based off our development. And for a lot of what the audience is going to be interested in today is we're going to be talking a lot about adolescents. We will talk a little bit about adults too, but since it's going to be geared more towards parents who are going to be working with their children who are involved in adapted sports, I must stress that I'm going to be highlighting a lot of the impact that it has to do on our kids and how important it is to get the optimal amount of sleep for overall health and longevity and optimal development as they grow into adults. So, are we a sleep-deprived society? All right, this is a question that's asked very often, especially in sleep scientist culture. My mentor, Dr. Sean Youngstedt, is actually a pioneer in this area where he actually believes, although we do live in this technological age, there actually is just as much danger in too much sleep as there is not enough sleep at all. But what we know is from a fact that adolescents, for sure, based off of what we've seen in observational, otherwise known as epidemiological research, is that most kids nowadays simply aren't getting enough. Today, we're going to be focusing most on 12 to 18 years of age. And as we can see, there's a lot of different health implications and potentially negative consequences of what could potentially happen to our kids or ourselves when we don't get enough sleep at night. Anything from increased daytime sleepiness, anything from being too drowsy on the road, which could actually has been found linked to over 100,000 crashes of vehicles per year. So if you've ever been on the highway first thing in the morning, we know here in Phoenix on the 10, you can just look out at 5 a.m. and you can pick at least 5 to 10 different cars that are swaying back and forth, all right? And this is most normally caused to people not getting enough sleep. This is highly apparent in our truck drivers. This is highly apparent in our TSAG population, such as police officers, firefighters, medical workers especially, are also at high risk of this, of sleep deprivation and its negative effects. So it's very, very important that we take a lot of what we're going to learn today to heart when it comes to getting enough sleep for your health. And the reason I have a picture up the top right of a young lady on her laptop is because more and more we live in this technological age where we have the world's amount of information at our fingertips, whether it's via a cell phone or via a computer, or we're staying up late watching Netflix on our high definition televisions. This has actually been found to contribute to our lack of quality sleep at nighttime and could further put us at further risk of further health implications down the road. So it's very important that we educate not only our adults, but our kids on the negative effects of using technology too late into the night. Today, we're going to discover why. There's a lot of different negative health outcomes that come from you not being able to get enough sleep. There's been a U-shaped association between not getting enough sleep and getting too much sleep. So in English, what that means is basically, if you're not getting the right amount of sleep, if you're getting less than 7 hours of sleep per night, or if you average greater than 9 hours of sleep per night, sometimes around average of 8.5, your risk of negative health outcomes rises significantly. And that increases your rates of developing diabetes. This increases your risk of developing cardiovascular disease, specifically as pictured here, atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries, high blood pressure. You are more likely to engage in high-risk activities such as consuming too much alcohol or drugs. It increases your risk of smoking. And the biggest epidemic that we have in our country now is becoming overweight and obese, which is a definite implication health risk factor that results in an even higher risk of developing things like diabetes and atherosclerosis. So if I were to show you briefly the prevalence of how this is occurring in our country, the CDC, the most recent one that we can find is that the prevalence is all across the United States. And as you can see, the darker the area, the more prevalent it is to find individuals who are simply not getting enough sleep at night. And this ranges from anything greater than or equal to 18 years of age. And as you can see, the darker areas are a lot more around the most congregated cities that we have. And then as you start to get out towards the west, not as much. Cities tend to be a little bit more spread out in that way. But this can also show you, if you were to compare this to a CDC map that would show the prevalency of obesity and people being overweight, they are almost identical. So there is a clear association where when it comes to individuals who are not getting enough sleep are definitely a much higher risk of being overweight, developing obesity, and other forms of chronic disease. And there might be some contributing mechanisms here that we can go over here in just a second on why that is. What is it that not getting enough sleep does to our health, and what can we do about it? So first things first, and let's talk about kids here for a second. So when it comes to kids, especially when we're talking about adapted populations where we're working with kids who are young adapted athletes who are playing wheelchair basketball or have particular injuries or neurological disorders, sleep is absolutely important for a number of things. Not only is sleep very, very important in the adolescent ages for physical development, but also mental development as well. All right? Many people are unaware that just because you turn 18 doesn't mean you stop growing. They've actually found that your brain doesn't stop growing until you're close to 25 years of age or so. Sleep is absolutely paramount for restoration of your mind and consolidating memories. It is absolutely paramount that you get enough sleep to build tactical skills, increasing your agility, your hand-eye coordination. It is absolutely important for physical restitution as far as recovering from exercise, increasing rates of growth. We grow when we sleep. Even more than that, we need to make sure we're getting enough sleep so that we recover properly, especially when we're sick. Sleep has been found to be the most powerful tool your body has to keeping you healthy. When you don't get enough sleep at night, you actually have depressed immune function, and you have less of an ability to fight off infection and viruses. And there's no more important time now in our history than now to have a very strong and optimal immune system. So basic consequences of poor sleep, all right? Especially when we're talking about our kids, we see a reduction in academic performance. Kids who are sleep deprived, and we can define this as having less than 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep, because we've seen that although adults need anywhere from 7 to 9 hours of sleep, adolescents require a bit more because they're in a particular part of their life where they're still growing, both in size, they're developing their endocrine systems, they're hitting puberty, right? They're developing in that way. Their minds are still growing, brain function is still growing, everything is still developing. Sleep is absolutely necessary for this. And when we see our kids who are not only involved with sports and involved with school, and then we also have to take into account a lot of our adapted athletes are also involved in particular types of tutoring or physical therapy. That all wears down more and more and more, and could also carry implications for why our kids aren't getting enough sleep at night. So it's very, very important that we bring that to the foray and importance at all costs. We also have mood disturbances. If you guys were here and watched some of our previous presentations, we talked about how physical activity helps overall well-being of kids nowadays, especially because we're finding that because we live in this technological age and we're finding more kids that are stuck to their phones, literally, that they're not developing their social skills. Well, there is not one mood disorder or neurological disorder that is not associated with getting enough sleep. All right, every single thing you can think of, whether it's related to depression or insomnia, is not related is related to not getting enough sleep. So consequences of sleep deprivation will even further exacerbate negative self-esteem and negative self-outlook on self-image. And we know that for kids and their development in society and in social circles and developing that social competence, that not getting enough sleep can be very detrimental to that process. Further, increase in risk-taking behavior and drowsy driving. All right, as our kids get older, especially with the population we deal with at Ability 360, with our wheelchair basketball teams and our other adapted sports, we find that we have kids that are starting to drive. All right, we have high school kids. Not getting enough sleep at night could further increase the risk of this risky taking behavior and drowsy driving, which further increases their risk of getting into an accident, and then other various health risk outcomes as well. So briefly, I'm going to go through how sleep impacts various systems of the body. And the first one I want to talk about is the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a collection of glands that encompasses all the different hormones in your body that are in charge of specific processes. So for instance, the endocrine system is going to include the hypothalamus in the brain, which releases things like growth hormone. Growth hormone is very important, especially in your youth. That has to do with the growth of particular organs, bones, muscle tissue. It releases cortisol, which we know cortisol is your primary stimulant hormone that wakes you up in the morning, regulates body processes, gets things started. It's also known as your stress hormone as well, for the reason that it is a stimulant and getting your body ready first thing in the morning. But we know that with sleep deprivation, not getting enough sleep, that it throws off our regulation of our endocrine system, and cortisol pushes up to a more than normal level, which we have found creates a negative impact on your health and your body and puts further stress on the body. The endocrine system is also in charge of melatonin. And if you guys have ever heard of melatonin, melatonin is think of the ignition starter at a race, all right? The guy that holds the starting pistol and shoots off the gun. Melatonin is the hormone that signals to the rest of the body it's time for sleep. And it signals to the rest of the actual processes that actually get us to sleep that now is the time. Leptin and ghrelin and insulin are the three important ones I want to talk about here when it comes to regulating your metabolism and what implications that has towards becoming overweight and obese. Because as we also know, that although there are rises in levels and prevalence of being overweight and obesity in our society among adults, it's also happening to our kids. And it could potentially be related to not getting enough sleep and the negative impact it's having on these particular hormones. So let me show you how it affects these hormones. So first, let's talk about blood glucose regulation and its issues with insulin. When you don't get enough sleep at night, your glucose levels remain high in the blood. All right. So when you first go to sleep and you go through the multiple stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right. And each stage has a particular function. Your body needs energy in some way in order to thrive off that. So what will happen is your liver will actually pump out blood glucose into the bloodstream, and your brain will use that as energy during the processes that occur overnight while you're asleep. Well, what ends up happening is when you don't get enough sleep at night, your body doesn't properly go through those stages, and you do not uptake the amount of glucose that you should during that time. As a result, your blood glucose levels stay higher. And as we know that when your blood sugar levels are too high and the body does not deal with that in the proper way, we start to have issues with glucose regulation. And if anyone is familiar with individuals that have issues with blood glucose regulation, basically what this means is when you have too high elevated levels of blood sugar over time, eventually your body gets to the point where it's not able to release enough insulin in order to take care of that glucose. And what ends up happening is we end up developing insulin resistance and sensitivity issues. And insulin resistance issues eventually lead into the development of diabetes. And as we know, this is one of the largest epidemics that we have in our country is diabetes being being the type of metabolic disease that is wreaking havoc on our health. The next two hormones I want to talk about are ghrelin and leptin. These are your food hormones, all right? When you think about ghrelin, the easiest way to remember ghrelin is grr, all right? You're feeling hungry hormone. And leptin is the opposite. Leptin is your satiety hormone. That's the hormone that's released by your fat cells when you've eaten food and you're full. It's a signal to the body that says, okay, we've had enough, we're good, okay? Now, what ends up happening is when you don't get enough sleep at night, it negatively impacts these two hormones. So what'll happen is it will actually blunt the response of leptin, and it'll increase the levels of ghrelin in your body, because when you stay up late longer than you should, your body thinks that you're supposed to be awake. All right? Your body's a very intelligent machine, and it thinks that if you're still awake, that there must be some sort of work that has to be done. We need to continue using energy, and the only way to do that, the way your body thinks, is we should probably consume some more food in order to be able to facilitate whatever activity we're doing up that late at night. Usually when this happens, though, think about what you're doing past 8 o'clock at night. You're more likely to be sedentary. As we know, most of our kids, they're lying down in bed. They're either studying, doing homework, or doing things they shouldn't be, like playing video games, being on social media, watching Netflix, all right? And this is only going to contribute to further weight gain, because when you're in this type of state, it actually acts as kind of an inhibition to your executive functioning in the brain. And you're more likely to make food choices that are much higher in calories. You're more likely to choose the potato chips. You're not going to open up the fridge and choose blueberries at 9 o'clock at night. You're tired. You want something salty, something delicious, all right? The risk of that, however, is it's really easy to get an excess of calories, more than what you need for the body's maintenance energy expenditure, and therefore you're more likely to gain weight. So some very negative health implications that we could see could be potential causes to why not getting enough sleep could negatively impact our health this way, and might be leading to certain issues that we see in our young kids or the athletes that we deal with when we coach. So what are the key takeaways here, all right, when it specifically comes to sleep deprivation and diabetes, all right? We see a reduced amount of glucose tolerance, so I'm not able to handle sugar as well, all right? I have poor sleep quality and architecture, which is going to impact my metabolism and therefore impact those hunger hormones and be more likely to overeat and gain weight. Also, sleep deprivation is also going to lead to decreased heart rate variability, and this means increased sympathetic activity. And just to put that into more easy to understand terms, when your body is more sympathetic than it is parasympathetic. So we have our central nervous system that's divided into two places, your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is fight or flight. It's meant to get me up and going, okay? Slightly can be stressful if you're in sympathetic activity for too long. Whereas our parasympathetic nervous system is rest, digest, okay, recover, build. Unfortunately, when we spend too much time in an increased level of sympathetic activity, more so than we are parasympathetic, this has a lot of health implications. This puts a lot of stress onto the heart. This makes it much more difficult to relax. This can hold implications that develop to increasing your risk of developing high blood pressure and other stresses response. As we know from stress science, too much stress is not good for the human body. A little bit is okay. You need a little bit of stress. Too much can result in disaster. So let's take a little bit of a turn now. Now that we've kind of set the basis for how not getting enough sleep might negatively impact our bodies, we need to see, okay, how's this going to impact our athletes? All right, we're Ability 360 here. We work with a lot of individuals who not only want to better themselves and lose weight, but we also want to work with individuals who are trying to get better, who are either for the purpose of losing weight or for their particular sports, particularly with our athletes that we see in our adapted sports at Ability 360. And what we know about sleep deprivation and sports is that it definitely reduces your performance, okay? Absolutely does. It'll affect your hand-eye coordination. It'll affect your speed. It will affect your sub-maximal performance of certain weightlifting exercises. So in other words, it reduces your strength and power output. And as we know from being coaches, we want our athletes to be as explosive and as powerful as possible, especially when it comes to particular activities that require us to be explosive and powerful. It's going to impact our decision-making abilities. So when we work with particular athletes that need to know and need to be able to think and make critical decisions on the fly during game time situations, if we don't have enough sleep, it's going to delay that. It's going to fatigue us. We're going to be less likely to make the decisions when they count. Learning and cognition will be impacted. Various forms of memory in your brain and particular forms of executive functioning, which are in charge of making decisions or thinking about what limb to move or what action to make, where to hit that ball, how far to reach, okay, how much to push, okay, or if we're in practice and we're learning new abilities and we're trying to figure out new plays or strategies that we're working on with our coach and our fellow teammates, not getting enough sleep is going to make it much more difficult to apprehend and remember those things permanently, and it's going to make it much more difficult to come together as a team and implement those strategies during game time. We also see reductions in immune system function. So our athletes are going to be much higher risk of injury and the potential to getting sick. And from working with adapted sport athletes, this can be especially important when we work with individuals who already have compromised immune system. And further, they have a susceptibility to weight gain. All right. So we already know, working with particular adapted athletes who are confined often to wheelchairs, we need to make sure that we're prioritizing physical activity, not only for the purpose of energy expenditure, but also to prevent weight gain. And when we have athletes who are sleep deprived, it's going to increase their risk further of overeating. So we really want to focus on adolescent athletes, all right, from 12 to 18 years. This is probably the primary population we work with oftentimes when it comes to our youth sports, and why sleep is going to be especially important for them when it comes to overall performance and their functioning as normal human beings. So current findings have actually shown us that certain research has been done on specific basketball-related skills. And from the research that we've seen that decreased sleep quality and quantity impairs related skills in basketball, such as field goal shooting percentage, three-pointers, accuracy of regular foul shots, passing abilities, and the ability to come off the ball on the court itself. Athletes might also have a longer sleep onset time if they're sleep deprived, which means it takes longer for them to fall asleep when it's that time to. They also have lower sleep efficiency the more sleep deprived they are, which means that they're going to fall in and out of sleep stages when they're not supposed to. The purpose of identifying certain sleep stages is each sleep stage lasts for a particular amount of time before it initiates the next stage. And when I have poor sleep efficiency, that means that my body is basically fumbling the ignition, okay? It has to keep overturning the T over and over again because the engine keeps turning off. And when that happens during the middle of a sleep stage, it has to go back and start over again and go through the entire process. And usually what that means is less time for overall restoration. And if we limit the amount of time we actually get to the final stage of REM sleep, which is in charge of overall mental restitution and consolidation of memories, then we will also see that we have very, very poor restoration and more likely to be groggy and less rested when we awake. Social demands and technology interference are also big implicators here. So when I have athletes that are in school and have all sorts of extracurricular activities and are also stuck on their phones for a lot of the time, will also negatively impact their ability to fall asleep and get the quality of sleep that they need. And a big thing that we need to bring to the attention of parents in particular is that just because you, the parents, only need 7 hours of sleep per night, you need to be aware that there is a reason why young kids need an early bedtime, because they need 9 hours of sleep per night to be able to optimally recover and grow, because they are in one of the most important growth periods of their life. So specifically, let's go into more of this. And we see submaximal performance decrements like we've already talked about. So we see that our athletes are not as able to lift as much weight for subsequent sets during strength training. We also know that there's an accumulative effect of fatigue from sleep loss. What this means is that you accumulate fatigue over time throughout. So let's put this into an image for you. So let's say that my kids are wheelchair athletes, or just kids in general that are between the ages of 12 and 18. The more sleep deprived you are throughout the week, okay, you will accumulate that sleep debt, that amount of fatigue sleep loss, and it'll take a long period of time before you're able to break out of that sleep deprived state. Because what your body will try to do is your body will try to adapt to the fact that you're not getting enough sleep. And it'll give you the perception that you feel okay. But there's a big problem with that. Just because your body has adapted to less sleep does not mean it's at optimal functioning. Because we have found that even if you're adapted to sleep loss, your cognitive abilities are still anywhere from 10 to 15% less than what they could be if you were getting consistent amounts of optimal sleep consistently throughout the week. So we have to be very, very careful to not fall under the impression that, oh, I only get 5 to 6 hours of sleep per night and I'm good, I can keep going. No, you are still at risk, more so than someone who is getting enough sleep per night, of not performing correctly, of being drowsy at the wheel, and being more likely to get into an accident, more likely to get sick, more likely not to be able to fight off infection, and so on and so forth. So the only way to beat this is to consistently get enough sleep day in and day out. And sometimes it can take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to break out of that after you've been conditioned to be adapted to sleep loss for a long time. We know that we just talked about negative aspect of glucose metabolism and neuroendocrine function. This is particularly important for athletes because athletes need to be able to utilize energy to facilitate their sport requirements. So if I have wheelchair basketball athletes, they highly rely on the anaerobic system for energy, all right, which means that they require carbs, all right? They got to have carbs. If you want athletes to be good at explosive sports where they're going up and down the court nonstop, all right, trying to be explosive, trying to be powerful, trying to be strong, if they're not consuming carbohydrates, they're simply not going to perform well. And if you're not getting enough sleep, this is going to negatively impact your body's ability to utilize carbohydrate, which can negatively impact performance. Further so, the neuroendocrine function, if you're sleep deprived and you're trying to get gains off of strength training program and strength and conditioning programs, and you're trying to recover and grow, if you're not getting enough sleep at night, your endocrine system is going to be negatively impacted, and you're going to negatively impact your ability to recover, and you're going to be more likely to be injured going forward as a result from those strength training or strength and conditioning programs or even practice itself. So it's very, very important to get enough sleep, not only from a health perspective, but its impact on our ability to perform. So if we look at research that's been done by no, she's not a doctor, I'm sorry, Sherry Ma, who has worked with top sleep researchers in the industry, including Bill Dement. She has done research focusing on extending sleep for athletes. One of her, I don't want to say revolutionary, but one of her most top-cited studies and research studies that gained a ton of attention was her sleep extension study with the Golden State Warriors way back when. This was done a few years ago, and what she did is she worked with the Golden State Warriors and the NCAA, and she extended their sleep up to 10 hours. Now, this does not exactly mean that they were asleep for 10 total hours, because that's a lot, but these are also collegiate athletes, all right? And as we know, some of these collegiate athletes are now in the NBA, all right? You can just tell by the picture there. And because of the amount of physical restitution that they require, the insane amount of workouts that they perform, and the high amounts of physical activity that they're involved in, they have a high need of sleep. And what they found was when they extended these basketball players' sleep to 10 hours in bed during the season, that they saw increased sprint times, they saw increased free throw accuracy, increased mood and vigor, so more determination and more will and motivation during the games themselves, and they saw decreased levels of fatigue. Now, the one criticism of this is, were they in a sleep-deprived state before they went into the intervention itself? But from what you can take away from this, however, though, is even if they were, increasing their sleep to normal amounts of sleep showed some benefit, that when you get the optimal amount of sleep you need per night, it's going to improve your performance from baseline. So very, very important that we focus on our athletes getting enough sleep. So how much do adolescents need? So when they've done research and they've let adolescents just sleep on their own with no time restrictions, okay, from the moment they fall asleep to the moment that they wake up naturally, the average adolescent from age 12 to 18 will sleep anywhere from 9 to 9.5 hours on average, all right? So the problem that we're seeing, however, is due to the uses of technology and social constraints and so on and so forth and all these extracurricular activities, most kids these ages in our country are only getting 7.5 to maybe 8.5 hours of sleep per night. And this is going to carry negative implications and negative consequences on their ability to perform in school, their ability to socialize, their ability to have optimal mental health, and their ability to perform in their sport. So absolutely important that we prioritize getting enough sleep. So I want to go over a couple causal factors here of what might be causing the poor sleep, besides all the social implications in our society here. And one of them could be the fact that their excuse me, their circadian clocks are later. Okay, so as we know from if you study sleep science, you will actually learn that our circadian rhythm clocks shift over time. So just really briefly, to describe to you what a circadian clock is your body, and you've probably heard the term body clock. Your body revolves on a 24 to 25-hour clock every single day, which means that at particular times of day, your body likes to do a certain thing. There are certain times of day where your body is good at metabolizing nutrients more so than it is at other times of day. There are times of day where your body is better apt to perform in physical activity than at other times per day. All right. Every single cell in your body, every single process, every single organ all regulates on its own 24 to 25-hour cycle. This also determines more when you're more likely to stay awake longer or when you're more likely to stay up later. And as we found, when you're a baby, you sleep all day, okay? You're maximal development here, and you become very, very early. You wake up very early and you sleep a lot throughout your prenatal childhood. And as you go into becoming a toddler and into an adolescent, then your clock actually starts to become later and later and later. So that's if you're parents and you see that when your kids were young and like 4 or 5, 6 years old, they went to bed at 8 o'clock and they didn't wake up the next morning until 6, 7 o'clock. Okay, pretty normal. But then as they start to become adolescents, they start to become teenagers, you start to see that they stay up a lot later and they sleep in a lot later. All right. So this is not only due to what society is doing to us, but this could also be due to their clocks, because we know that adolescent circadian clocks will actually shift, and it'll become more natural for them to be more alert at later times during the evening or even into the night, especially if they're nighttime individuals, because we also see a difference between morning types and night types. And then as you become an adult, it starts to level out right back in the middle. And as you start to age into your elderly years, you kind of revert back to how you were as a child, and you have an early clock again. So it could very much be well due to our circadian rhythms. But even more towards the importance, we'll get back to circadian rhythms in just a second. Let's look at the potential external causes of poor sleep, which we've already cited in great detail. Definitely school and extracurricular activity. All right, our kids have to study, they have to learn, they have to work with mom and dad. Their sporting schedules, and for a lot of, I know for a fact that some of the athletes that I work with at Ability 360, they're involved in multiple sports. All right, so there's even more stress. And then that will further reduce their sleep opportunity because they're staying up late, they're studying, they're involved with certain things outside of school and outside of sports. We also see an increase rise in the consumption of caffeine and energy drinks in young kids now, which is bad. There is no reason why kids should be drinking Monster drinks or Red Bulls or anything like that. Even coffee. I didn't have coffee until I was 22 years old. There's there's no reason for kids to be consuming a high level degree of caffeine. And when they have too much caffeine, particularly into the afternoon, this will for sure negatively impact their sleep. The way sleep works is we build up adenosine in the brain, and it acts as a signal to start their sleep processes. And what caffeine does is caffeine will block those receptors, and as a result, help us be more alert, will also delay the time between we actually get to fall asleep at night. It'll delay the signal to be sent. And because caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours, just because it might halfway be out of your system, it's still floating around in your bloodstream way past 8, 9, sometimes midnight in the middle of the night, and can negatively impact your ability to fall asleep. And then, of course, our social media and technology usage. And we're going to go into here in just a second when we get into circadian rhythm science, why screen usage negatively impacts your sleep. And it all has to do with your circadian clock. All right. So as I said a couple slides ago, your circadian clock is going to determine very many things, from when you wake up in the morning to what time of day is best for you to be physically active, what time of day is best for you to do cognitively demanding activities, and so on and so forth. So what we have found for the majority of individuals, your body temperature is lowest at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And then as soon as you reach about 5 or 6 a.m. or so, cortisol levels spike up. And as a result of that, your body temperature starts to rise, and it starts to signal to your body, hey, it's time to wake up. Okay. And as you might notice, in most people, this usually happens when the sun rises. All right. So we're typically conditioned to be at odds with the sun. Okay, we are diurnal creatures. We are not nocturnal. Diurnal means that we're supposed to be up and awake during the day and asleep and away at nighttime, whereas nocturnal is the opposite, which is why when you see nocturnal animals, why they are awake at night and asleep during the day. They're the opposite of us. So when we wake up with the sun, our melatonin levels drop, all right? So our signals to the brain that we need to sleep goes away, okay? And then first thing in the morning, after about 1 or 2 hours or so, then we'll probably more likely to have some sort of bowel movement. And then we become most alert around 10 to 12 a.m. or so. We've been awake for about 4 to 5 hours. There's been a decent amount of blood flow to the brain. There has been enough ample time to potentially consume nutrients and thus get glucose to the brain and thus become more cognitively aware, cognitively active. So if you are someone who is trying to find the best time of day to do cognitively demanding work that requires a lot of creativity, it could be very well possible the best time of day for this is late to mid-morning. And then as your body temperature increases, we know that body temperature is associated with increase in neural impulse firing, more nutrition towards particular muscle groups, and better contractility, which means better ability to utilize muscle tissue. So it very well be the main reason why a lot of athletic competitions are in the afternoon or later in the evening is because our exercise performance abilities peak in late afternoon. All right. So they've actually even found with physical activity that if you're going to try and figure out what times of day is best for you to do certain cardiovascular activity versus strength training, they've actually recommended that if you're going to do cardiovascular training, to do that in the morning, whereas save your strength training for the evening, because they found that you can actually produce more power output, and it's actually a lot, you're less likely to incur injury if you're going to work out when your body temperature is at its highest, which is normally in that late afternoon, early evening. And then melatonin levels will rise in the early evening, your body starts to cool down, and then it's time to fall asleep again. So this is a basic look at what our circadian rhythms could be potentially look like. Now, what does it have to do with anything when it comes to what happens with light and why we're not getting enough sleep and so on and so forth? Well, here's a clear picture to that. So we need to think about the relationship between our body clocks and sleep. So the sun is the most powerful impactor or stimulant onto your body clock. So light has been found to be what's called a Zeitgeber. A Zeitgeber is any type of item, any type of stimulus that will act on our body and influence our body clock, either in a positive or a negative way. And the way that we perceive that is through our eyes. So when we look at the sun, it will stimulate our retinas and send a message through our retinas and activate a protein called melanopsin. And what this does is it will influence our body's regulatory clock, known as the SCNN, or in science terms, suprachiasmatic nucleus. But if you just want to put that in English, it's your master clock, okay? Your master clock regulates all processes of the human body. And this can affect function of muscle tissue. This will affect your liver. This will affect your kidneys. This could potentially affect your digestive system. This affects your heart. And this will also affect your ability to digest and even your reproductive system. So when it comes to light, all right, we need to be very careful, because when it comes to technology, like the bright blue light we get from our phones or our computers, is the exact same wavelength as the sun, okay? So we want to prioritize getting as much light as we can during the day, because if we get a lot of light during the day, that basically tells your body, okay, we got to upregulate our body's processes to be awake and do what we need to do for the day. And so it raises our alertness, and it's even been found to reduce depression. And then if you look back to old days, like Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol time, all right, everyone used candles, all right, that orange glow, all right? And that orange type of light doesn't have a negative impact on the brain and does not suppress melatonin and allows us to fall asleep. However, now that we live in a technological age where we have really, really bright artificial light, we have found that this artificial light has the exact same wavelength as the sun, okay? So light functions off of wavelengths. That's how we perceive it. We perceive it as light, but if we want to break it down in physics terms, it's all wavelengths. And it's the same exact brightness and wavelength as the sun. And so when you're looking at a cellular phone device and it's in the evening, all right, or you start getting into the night, you're basically providing an artificial sun light to yourself. And when your eyes perceive that, they send a message to the brain. And you're basically telling your brain that even though it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, that it's still daytime. And so it's going to influence your body's processes to thinking that it's daytime. And then because of that, it will delay your body clock, which will delay the processes by which you fall asleep. And it makes you more likely to have insomnia, be restless, and not be able to fall asleep. So, okay. And there are also other health implications. We won't go too into far detail with this for time purposes here. But we know that if you do not have a healthy clock, all right, or a healthy circadian rhythm functioning, that this can have negative health aspects. And we know that if you are a shift worker or an overnight nurse, a police officer, some form of firefighter, or anyone that does any type of shift work, your rates of cancer risk are doubled. Just because you're going against everything the body is trying to do. The body is going to fight you on absolutely every aspect of your health. All right. And we also see this in jet lag, which we're going to talk in just a second, because even our culture has found how to even make an artificial amount of jet lag. And this can actually increase your risk of depression, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, developing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and so on and so forth. So what we have found that I'm gonna try and skip through this a little bit so we can get to the end because we have to get to the tips. But this all has to do with the development of what we call social jet lag, and this is very, very important, especially for kids, because we know kids usually have a particular bedtime and a particular wake time every day to get to school, and adults have a particular work schedule, and then they usually do the same thing, bed at the same time every night, and then they wake up at the same time every day to go to work, until you get to the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And usually these are the hot times of the week for social activity. You're more likely to stay up late. You're more likely to watch TV. You're more likely to get together with friends. You're more likely to go out to dinner, go out to movies, so on and so forth. All right. We live in a very cultural setting. This is America. We like to be around other people. Unfortunately, when you do this, and you go from a few days of having a consistent sleep schedule to all of a sudden pushing it out of alignment by staying up late and sleeping in, you actually create artificial jet lag as if you were traveling different time zones. And as a result, where your clock might have been normal on Thursday, your clock is now delayed 1 or 2 hours forward on the next day. And this especially happens when people sleep in on the weekends, all right? And we have found that adolescents do the same thing as adults. They like to sleep in an extra 1 to 2 hours on the weekends. And unfortunately, this is why Mondays are absolutely disastrous, because after you've slept in till, let's say, 8 or 9 a.m. on Saturday or Sunday, sometimes 10, okay? And then you have to go back to waking up at 6 a.m. on Monday. You're basically trying to wake up your body at 6 a.m. when your body is accommodated to being at 3 a.m. because you've been sleeping in. So it's as if you traveled to a different part of the country or a different part of the world. And so your body is going to be behind. And that's why when you wake up at 6 a.m. on Monday, you feel terrible. And you're like, get out of my way, I need my coffee, okay? Absolutely disastrous. And what's even worse than that is it takes 24 hours for your body to shift back to normal. So you're not going to feel normal until Wednesday or Thursday. And then what happens again? Whoop, you go right back in again and you do it all over again. And it creates this vicious cycle. And what they have found is for every hour of social jet lag that you have, increases your risk of heart disease, independent of how much sleep you're getting, by 11%. All right. It increases your risk later on in life of heart attack. It increases your risk of developing atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease, and it increases your health risks with high blood pressure. So it's very, very important that we pay attention to this, that social jet lag could be a potential health risk factor for developing diabetes, developing obesity, okay? And it's not only happening in our adults, it's happening with our kids. So what do we do about this, coach? Okay, well, Dr. Sachin Panda is a prominent researcher in this field, and I won't go too much into this for the sake of time, but Dr. Sachin Panda is a revolutionary pioneer in time-restricted feeding research, which basically means that you keep your activities and your eating habits in a specific window consistently the same time every day. This has been found to regulate your clock and keep you on a more consistent schedule, which might have healthy implications for health. Okay. If you're interested in learning more about this, please reach out to me. We'll be sure to include my contact information. This is a great area of science. But since we're getting close to time here, I want to make sure that we spend a decent amount of time going over what we can do about this. Okay. So I'm sorry that we didn't have enough time to go through the intervention here, but I want to make sure we get to the tips so that our kids and our parents know how to correct our sleep. So the first thing you have to do is you need to assess your sleep. Okay. Because even though you think you might be getting a particular amount of sleep per night, oftentimes we are victims of overestimating. And you cannot rely on getting on readings from things like Fitbits or Apple iPhones due to the fact, excuse me, that they're not accurate. All right, your iPhone is not accurate. Your Android phone, not accurate. Your Fitbit, not accurate at all. Okay, we've known for a long time that things like pedometers and fitness trackers are very all over the place when it comes to their measurement of physical activity, but they're great reference tools. Same thing when it comes to sleep. A lot of these devices are based off of movement, and it can be anything that could influence your movement during the night. It doesn't actually pick up on you going through multiple stages of sleep throughout the night, which is the most important. So a Fitbit, for example, wouldn't be able to tell me how much REM sleep you're getting. It might be able to give you an estimation based off of how you're moving when you sleep, but it's nowhere near a clear representation. You would have to get a real actigraph, okay, which are very expensive clinical devices, as you see in the picture there. These are used at universities. We use these at ASU for a lot of our studies, and they are one of the gold standards. All right, nothing beats polysomnography. A polysomnography device is something that hooks to your head. You wear basically EKG leads and you sleep all night in the lab. That is the pure way to really figure out how well you're sleeping. But if you're working with kids, you're working with athletes, you want to go with sleep diaries. Okay, just to give you an idea of what time they're waking up in the morning, how much time they spent in bed, how they felt when they woke up, and then the results of that, so on and so forth. Very, very important that you do to see if there's reason for you to particularly include some sort of sleep intervention. So what are my sleep hygiene tips? So this has been my basis for my research as a doctoral student here, and I'm about to present, hopefully, my dissertation this fall and finally complete it. And from what I've gathered, working with top sleep doctors in the industry and at Arizona State University, these are probably the most clinically effective things you can do to improve your overall sleep for adults and for children. And a lot of them are very straightforward. So first things first, get as much natural light as possible, as much as you can. Okay. There's been multiple research studies that have looked at individuals who do not get enough natural light from the sun tend to be more depressed, be a higher risk for mood disorders, all right, and less likely to fall asleep at night, because what they've actually found with the body is you need to have a contrast between light and darkness. And if you're not getting enough light during the day, you're basically not giving yourself enough of a signal to the body to turn the switch back off for your body to signal to itself to start to fall asleep and start to unwind for the night. So super important that you get as much light as you can during the day. If you have some sort of job that keeps you from doing so, have your lunch outside. Do anything you can to get at least 15 to 30 minutes of light per day. Even if it's on a walk, any way that you can get light in, do the best that you very can. Get as much light as you possibly can. During the day, not in the evening. Daily exercise. We all know that physical activity is very, very good for the body, especially when we look at circadian rhythms. We know that if you do physical activity first thing in the morning, it can actually help advance your body clock and make it more likely that you'll fall asleep at night. But do not think that doing exercise at night will negatively impact your sleep. This is a very common myth where people think that if you work out right before bed, that's going to screw up your sleep. This is actually false. That is not true. There are many individuals that we've done research with, or that we've seen in the epidemiological research, where that's simply not true. Usually people feel better after they do their exercise because it mitigates their stress, and then they feel better, and then they're more likely to conk out on the pillow. So as long as you're getting exercise at some point in the day, very beneficial for your health, very beneficial for your sleep quality. Naps. Naps have to be used in a very responsible way, because we know that power naps, all right, and a power nap is anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes of just resting your eyes, can be very beneficial and can even restore brain or cognitive functioning and give you enough juice to keep going later in the afternoon. But if you nap for too long, meaning longer than 30 minutes, you run the risk of interrupting a deep stage of sleep. And therefore, when you wake up, you're basically interrupting a major reaction. And so when you wake up, you're more likely to be groggy. You could actually negatively impact your performance. And you'll also negatively impact your sleep later on at night, which will also negatively impact the next subsequent day. So if you're going to take a nap, keep it short, keep it sweet, and get back going. All right. Don't be loosey here and get all crabby because you took a nap that was too long. Stop using stimulants, okay? If at all costs, if you can, okay? If you have to have your cup of coffee or your caffeinated beverage, adults, okay, stop using caffeine after 1 o'clock. Children, adolescents, I would abstain from at all costs, all right? Especially when we're working with adapted athletes, all right? There's absolutely no need for caffeine usage, okay? Because we know that if you have it after a certain amount of time, especially for adolescents whose metabolisms are not as well developed as adults, caffeine is going to stick around longer, could have potentially negative health effects on their cardiovascular system, and will keep them up all night long. So try to refrain as an adolescent from using caffeine, and if you're an adult, try to cut usage after noon or 1 o'clock. If you're sleep deprived, that is the equal to being under the influence. They have found that if you are sleep deprived, and this means less than 7 hours of sleep per night, it is almost equal to the effect the body has when you've had enough alcoholic beverages to equal 0.8% in your blood alcohol content. And that we know that I spoke about earlier, drowsy driving results in over 100,000 crashes per year. Next, no booze. Children, this is a no-brainer. You shouldn't be drinking. You're not of age. Adults, however, usually under the influence that you could get away with a nightcap to help you fall asleep. This is a old folks tale where you could have a drink before you go to bed and help knock you out, even if you're sick. Don't ever do that, okay? Because alcohol has been found to negatively impact the sleep architecture, which means that it's going to negatively impact your ability to go from stage to stage to stage to stage. So just like as I told you with sleep efficiency issues, if you drink alcohol, it's like you put the key into the ignition of your car and you're constantly turning over. The engine just won't turn over and turn on, all right? And your brain will constantly revert back to stage one and stage one and stage one again. And even though you feel knocked out after drinking alcohol, you're actually just knocking out your primary cortex of the brain. You're not actually allowing restorative sleep to take place. This has the same negative aspects as sleeping pills would have on the human body. So very dangerous, very bad for your health. Make sure that if you choose as an adult to consume alcoholic beverages, that you do so 2 to 3 hours before going to bed, and make sure it's only 1 or 2. Have a nightly routine, especially our kids. This is something that is unheard of. You should definitely have some sort of nightly routine because your body will associate particular tasks with getting unwound and getting ready for bed at night. This can be done with certain types of reading, getting ready for the day tomorrow, laying out your clothes. Getting into some sort of routine will help your subconscious wire itself to get used to doing certain things to get you ready to go to bed at night, and can improve your sleep. So nightly routines, relaxing activities are the most beneficial. Meditation, prayer, practicing gratitude, journaling, or some sort of relaxing reading activity. Your bedroom is your sanctuary, okay? Your bedroom should be dark, your bedroom should be quiet, and your bedroom should be at 68 degrees, okay? 68 degrees has been found to be the most powerful temperature, all right, in signaling to the body that it's time to fall asleep. Your body core temperature has to come down for you to get the most optimal sleep you possibly can, okay? So keep it dark, keep it quiet, and keep it cool, all right? And also, make sure that the only activities that you're doing in your bedroom are sleep-related activities, okay? Otherwise, your body will associate being awake and doing active activities when you're in the bedroom and could negatively impact your sleep. When it comes to technology, stop using technology 1 to 2 hours before bed, or use some sort of blue light filter app or device in order to clear out the blue light. Because if you continue to use blue light devices, phones, TVs, computers late into the evening, it will negatively impact your sleep by delaying your body clock and making it much later before you'll actually start to feel drowsy and fall asleep. Okay. Breathing exercises have also been found to be very powerful. All right. I teach this to all my athletes and all my clients. It'll help restore parasympathetic nervous system activity and will help a lot of our issues that we see in many breathers in our society who have poor postural issues and are not able to relax or initiate the parasympathetic nervous system well. So deep breathing before you go to bed has been found to be very beneficial and has a very nice, soothing, calming effect to help you relax and go to sleep, especially if you're a high stress person. These are great. All right. And the most powerful one, I save the best for last. And this is usually the tip that goes unwarranted, that goes ignored. I can't stress enough the importance of this final tip. Go to sleep at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every day for the rest of your life. That is the most powerful way to correct your sleep. It is the most powerful way to keep your sleep well, to keep your sleep quality high, to keep your health optimal. The most powerful way is to have a consistent sleep schedule at all costs. Try to fight sleeping in on the weekends. Try to keep your body as regular as you possibly can to have the most optimal amount of sleep for academic performance, for physical performance, and your overall health and well-being. Remember, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. If you want to have the highest level of health, if you want to be able to perform the best in school, if you want to be able to perform the best in your sport, you have to work for it and you have to be consistent doing it day in and day out. This has been a presentation. My name is Christopher Perry, a wheelchair basketball consultant coach at Ability 360. I'm running this lecture series. This has been a presentation from Ability 360 and Move United Sports. Thank you for attending our hashtag Adapt to Home lecture series. We hope you got something great out of today, and I hope you get some sleep. All right. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys soon. Tune in next week.